Well, the NFL Combine is over. We've had risers, we've had fallers, and we've had players drop out of the first round already. I'll cover it all on version 3 of my NFL mock draft on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. And you join me as we are less than 24 hours from a cyclone literally hitting my hometown on the east coast of Australia. We've got high winds, we've got flooding already starting to happen, and I've got a mock draft for you, number 3 so far in this preseason. If you've got any questions or comments, please pop them below in the comments section. Or, of course, you can message me either on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. It'd also be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. Plus, you can check out all of my fantasy rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, I'll have a written write-up of this draft over at football.razzball.com. But let's get into the draft for today. And today, as always, I'm going to be showing it to you with this format. This is my most up-to-date draft. Obviously, I'll be going through all of the other options for each pick as well. And at the moment, the bookie's heavy favorite is Cam Ward. He seems like about a 75% chance of being the first pick at this stage. And kind of makes sense. He is a more upside quarterback than Shedeur Sanders, who admittedly did impress a lot of people at the Combine, more so with his interviews rather than anything else. But so did Cam Ward. He apparently interviewed very well. It does seem like one of these guys will go number 1. Now, it is possible that the Titans will try to trade out of 1 and decide they want to go with another position. If they trade out, I do expect it's probably the Giants who move up here. Based on the bookmakers we've got down here, there's about even odds of the Titans or the Giants taking this first pick, which is pretty wild to me. Honestly, I still think the Titans are favorite to get it. I'm considering even betting that myself, but there is a real chance that the Giants could draft up. There certainly have been reports by some insiders suggesting that it's a fait accompli, that we do see the Giants take this pick at some stage. And if that happens, again, it's probably Cam Ward. I believe that Cam Ward's the most likely number 1 pick for the Giants, even though we have had slightly conflicting reports on that. I know that Charles Robinson has said that he's expecting them to go to Cam Ward. But ultimately, Tony Pauline said they probably wouldn't pick Sanders. And yet Jordan Renard said, they like Sanders. Sanders would be the pick even if they went to number 1. So as always around draft time, you're going to get different reports. But if the Titans stay here, I'm still backing them to take Cam Ward. I don't think it really makes sense for them to go ahead with Will Levis. I know they have a lot of other needs, but Ward's going to need time to develop anyway. So take a couple of seasons, rebuild, then strike in a couple of years' time while Ward is still on his rookie contract. I know there's some other good players coming through, but you can't guarantee you're going to have an early pick again next year. Having said that, if you've got Will Levis, probably will. If they don't go with Cam Ward, it does seem like it's probably going to be Carter that goes here as the edge rusher. I know Travis Hunter's not totally out of the question, but I think Carter is most likely. And in this mock, I've got Carter going at number 2 to the Browns. This is a tough one. I don't think it's impossible at all that the Browns just trade up with the Titans themselves and take that number 1 pick. They probably want to make sure that they're going to get Cam Ward, who does seem to be considered the superior quarterback by most. I think the Browns are going to be a little bit scared off by the fact that Deion Sanders is coming out talking about not really wanting his son moving to Cleveland. Kind of understandably so. They're a bit of a mess at the moment. They got a lot of money tied up in the Deshaun Watson contract. Obviously, that's not going anywhere with his second injury in as many years. He's obviously going to miss the 2025 season. They do need a new quarterback, but they have so many other needs that potentially they can just wait another year and focus on trying to rebuild. Carter would come in and be a Myles Garrett replacement, or if they can somehow get Garrett to stick around, be an excellent bookend for him as well. I do think Cam Ward's an option. Shedeur Sanders is also a real possibility here if they like him enough. There's not really clear reports on how they feel about him, but it would be a real risk with the way his father is talking. I do know that the Browns do view Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, and that's why he's less likely to go here, because you're not as likely to take a receiver this early, especially given Hunter isn't quite as much of an elite receiver as he is a cornerback. So I do think Carter is the most likely pick at this juncture. Coming just after him, here's Sanders going to the Giants. Giants desperately need a quarterback. There's a lot of talk that they might pick up a bridge quarterback, someone like an Aaron Rodgers. Sam Darnold would be a bit more expensive and would signal that maybe they don't want someone in the draft. So I think it's more likely to be a Rodgers or a Russell Wilson, particularly. Maybe a Kirk Cousins would be the kind of guy that they bring into town. Certainly been a lot of talk that Rodgers wants to stay in New York, and it wouldn't surprise me in the next week if we hear something about it that in free agency. But for me, it's going to be Sanders in the draft. Cam Ward is a real possibility if they trade up. There's like nearly a 50% chance of that happening, according to bookies. Plus, of course, if they don't go quarterback or if the quarterback's gone, potentially because both of them have gone in the first two picks, I do think it's probably Abdul Carter here, but it's not out of the question. We could see them go Travis Hunter. Really could go either way with that, but according to Charlie Campbell's where I get a lot of my rumors and stuff like that over at Walter Football. Walter Football's fantastic for any draft stuff, so I recommend you check that out. Charlie's talked about Carter being ahead of Hunter, and that's good enough for me. So if it's not Sanders, I think it's probably Carter, assuming they can't get their hands on Ward. At number 4, and this has fallen pretty nicely for the Patriots. I do feel like ideally they want 2 quarterbacks taken in the first 2 picks because they're not going to take one with their pick. They've got Drake May. In fact, it wouldn't entirely surprise me if we see them trade back if they're able to. If we do see a situation where we see Carter and Hunter off the board at this point because Sanders has fallen. At that point, would they be able to trade back? Well, I think that the Raiders would be willing to pay him a little bit to go up. Would it be enough? Do they think that the Jets are a real threat to jump up? Maybe even the Saints? Not entirely sure, but I can imagine a situation where the Patriots are happy to go down to 6, 7, or even 9 and know they can still get their hands on Will Campbell, who is their alternative option if they can't get Carter or Hunter. Carter's probably the option they like most. There have been reports coming out saying they like Abdul Carter. That was Charlie Campbell again. But we do also know that they like Travis Hunter as well. They see him as a cornerback, which I think makes more sense in this range. But obviously, he's a fantastic two-way player. You can imagine a situation where he plays some snaps on offense. They clearly need wide receivers as well. So ultimately, this kind of hits in 2 spots that are helpful to them. That is, of course, assuming they can't get Carter. Will Campbell, a viable option. We'll talk about him later on. I think this is too early for him. Now, number 5, and this is where it gets really tough. I don't know what to do with this pick. I don't know what the Jaguars think they're going to do with this pick, I guess is more the key point. I know what I would personally do if I was them. I would probably go O-line, even though I don't think that either of the options here are a great option. Some really interesting stuff going on in betting markets at the moment. Memboy out of Mizzou is the current favorite to be the first offensive lineman off the board. I haven't seen any sharp mock drafter putting him as their first lineman. Most people are putting Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks, and we've heard reports from all the guys I trust, like the Charlie Campbells, like Walt himself, and also like from the likes of Tony Pauline saying it's probably going to be Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks, and certainly Banks has been rising according to those guys. It is entirely possible we see a Kelvin Banks go here. Will Campbell's not out of the question, but they could also go D-line. I know a lot of rankers really like Mason Graham here, but there's a lot of reports that he's got bad body, that this is a little bit early for him, that they actually prefer Kenneth Grant over him. In fact, I've mocked Grant here, or at least thought about it at times as well. But it does seem to me that Will Johnson is the top pure cornerback in this class. There's really a big gulf between him and the other options. And I do think that Jacksonville really does need a cornerback. They've been taken on through the air way too effectively of late, and they need to cover that. And I feel like Johnson is the perfect option for them to bring in there. Is that what they go for? Where it could be any of those 3 options, and I really don't know. And if Johnson doesn't go here, I think he could be in for a bit of a fall because there's no other teams that desperately need him. Maybe he could go to the Jets. Not impossible the Raiders take him, but I think they have their eyes set on 2 players, and we'll talk about now. So the Raiders I have going for McMillan here, but it's entirely possible they go for Ashton Genty. A lot of different mockers are putting Genty in at 6, and I understand why. For me, it's a little bit early for them. I also don't think it really makes sense. As a general rule, you're better off targeting a running back when you're kind of in that win now mentality. I don't think the Raiders are there. They don't have their quarterback. And even if they draft one in the second round, because they're not going to get it in the first, I do think that it doesn't really make sense to take a running back. A wide receiver, you can kind of build with a little bit. You're giving a weapon to your new quarterback. Running back, probably the last thing that you take before you're about to strike, because running backs are good straight out of the gate. Most other positions take a little bit of development. So for that reason, I think McMillan makes most sense here. They could, of course, trade up, as I mentioned earlier, and go get Sanders. Not entirely impossible. They trade up all the way to the one spot, but I can't imagine the Titans are going to want to go all the way back here. This doesn't exactly hit a value range that I think they'd be too interested in. If Will Johnson falls, he would make sense here as well. But there have been a lot of reports suggesting that it's probably going to be McMillan or Genty, or a trade up for Sanders, or Sanders potentially even falls to this range. McMillan's the guy for me. He's big, he's strong. A lot of mockers have him falling a lot further than this, but I think this is an appropriate range for him. I think he is the top pure wide receiver in this class. And I do feel like he gives the Raiders that number one to go with Jacoby Myers that they really need. Now, here's the first defensive tackle coming off the board, and it's not Mason Graham, despite what a lot of people are suggesting. I've got Kenneth Grant going to the Jets. Makes perfect sense to put this guy in there next to Quinnen Williams. Williams can rush the quarterback. Grant can fill those gaps and be that excellent run defender he is. Just a perfect fit for this sort of situation. There are a heap of other options as well. They could trade up or just get lucky and happen to get Sanders. I don't think that's really what they're going for here. They could also get McMillan himself as well, with Devontae Adams leaving. But with a defensive head coach, I feel like Aaron Glenn's going to be more inclined to go defense. They could go Will Johnson if he's available. In this case, he's not. So they go defensive tackle. They go Grant. Graham, also a viable option. But a lot of reports, especially out of Charlie Campbell, suggesting he's going to fall into the teens. Now, Carolina gets very lucky. They need edge, they need defensive tackle, they need cornerback. There will definitely be a good one available at this juncture. A lot of edge rushes rising in this draft, with a couple falling as well, which is really interesting. The main guys to look out for here, Michael Williams is probably the favorite, but Shamar Stewart has been a very popular pick of late, and Jalen Walker's also been rising up as well. So any of those three is possible, but I think Williams is the favorite in my opinion. They need to replace Brian Burns. While it would be great if they could get someone like a James Pierce and trust that he is going to behave himself, the character issues are too great to take him this early anymore, even though he is a true Brian Burns type. I think Williams is a perfectly applicable guy to slot in here, but it's not impossible. They'll take a tackle. Maybe they take the remainder of Grant or Graham, or maybe both are available. Not impossible even that they take Will Johnson if he falls to here as well. They will definitely have a good option available at 8. As will the Saints at 9. They need to sort out their D-line. I do feel like defensive tackle or edge makes the most sense. Wide receiver is an option. I'm going ahead with Chris Olave and Shaheed is really not viable for whichever quarterback they're running with, assuming it's Derek Carr. But at the same time, they seem to just kind of make it work. They had terrible play last season because they had no Olave or Shaheed. With those two guys back, might end up being okay. So they could go for McMillan here potentially. Could go for Will Johnson even if he falls, because they do need slightly better cornerback play. But I feel like it makes sense to go D-line. Cam Jordan's not going to be around forever. I feel like Jalen Walker gives them a lot of burst off the edge. Problem is he doesn't really fit their system. That is a little bit of a concern for me. I think they'd probably prefer a Williams or maybe even a Shamar Stewart. Problem with Stewart is he was explosive at the combine, but he didn't really have great production. Only 1.5 sacks last season. I had him in a college fantasy league, an IDP college fantasy league, and he was so frustrating. He was barely involved, getting me practically no production at all. So, look, I don't know that if they're going to be put off by that, not because it's going to affect their fantasy teams, but obviously because it's going to affect how much output they get from him. We have seen players like that go very early. Think Trevon Walker, for example. But I don't think it makes sense in this spot. So I've got them going for Jalen Walker, but there are a million other players that I could see them taking here that would make sense. Also not impossible if Sanders starts to fall, if they go up and get him and decide it's time to move on for Derek Carr. I think that's very possible. Not entirely sure what to make of this situation. The Saints are going to be a little bit of a mess for a little while, I think. In at the 10 spot, and I've been going O-line the whole time here. They need a heap of O-linemen. But they kind of picked up too. They got Joe Tooney in for a 4th rounder, which is a little bit crazy from the Chiefs, and I'm very sad about that, obviously. And then they've gone and gotten Jonah Jackson as well. So I don't know. I'm not sure that he's really going to be a starter for them, which is why I've gone and gotten them a tackle here in Will Campbell. I think Will Campbell's probably the favorite to be the first offensive lineman in my book off the board, but it could easily be Kelvin Banks. I know the bookies say Memboy is the guy to get, but I don't know. I think it's going to be Campbell. So despite his small arms, he's still worked out very well. And even if he doesn't work out on the edge, he could easily come in and play guard. They do need 3 good interior linemen. So I think it makes sense for them to keep shoring up that line, make it easy for Caleb Williams. They're still paying a whole heap of money to DeAndre Swift, but despite that, they could go Ashton Genty and go and get him and have an excellent running back to really complete this offense. But I think if you've got a good line, you'll be able to get guys like Swift and Roschon Johnson going, and everything's going to be okay anyway. Defensive line, an option here, particularly if Grant falls or they like Mason Graham. But I don't know. I prefer O-line myself. And here's Kelvin Banks, who I just mentioned before. The 49ers finally getting an early pick. And I think if either Campbell or Banks is here, they probably pick them. Otherwise, probably go for an edge rush to get some speed off the edge. Jalen Walker would work. Shamar Stewart is around in this mock, and I considered him here. Not impossible. They go interior as well. We've seen them do that in the past. Mason Graham would be an option, but they have talked about wanting speed on their D-line and in their defense in general. And I do think it makes sense to do that off the edge. In this case, though, Kelvin Banks, I mean, a lot of talk he could go as high as top 5. He's not an elite O-lineman, but he's a strong O-lineman. He's one of 2 viable options in this draft. And I feel like Banks makes most sense with this pick. Could see it going another way, though. Most people have been mocking Dallas Genty, which is really interesting because he's not the bookie's favorite at the moment. That's actually the Bears are the favorite to get Genty at the moment. He's one of few players that actually has a market on which team he goes to. And he's currently favored to go to the Bears, but the odds are still pretty low. They're talking like below 25% kind of, but that's for every other team as well. This doesn't make sense for the Cowboys to do this. The Cowboys are not strong across the board, and as much as Dak wants weapons, makes sense to get him a wide receiver. There's not a wide receiver here that fits in this range. If McMillan was available, I'm sure they'd jump at that or even trade up to get him, but they need someone next to CeeDee Lamb. They could even go for someone like a Tyler Warren. I know they've got Jake Ferguson, but I feel like if you've got a second receiving weapon, a proper receiving weapon, like we saw the Raiders do with Brock Bowers, where they had a viable starting tight end and they went up and got someone anyway because they were a real mismatch weapon. Makes sense to do that with Tyler Warren or even a Colston Loveland. But I just feel like they're going to go Genty. They've always relied on their run game. This feels like a Jerry Jones move. It's not an optimal move. It's not a good move, but it's a Cowboys move to make. And I think that's the reason that I've got it mocked here. Here's Mason Graham. Going to the Dolphins. A little bit of an interesting one. A lot of people mocking the Dolphins safety. Look, there's a couple of really good safeties in this draft. There's Malaki Starks is pretty good. Nick Emanwari, who I can never pronounce. Look, he looked fantastic at the combine. He's a fantastic option. He should go in this range somewhere as well. And yet he's a safety, and they do usually fall a little bit despite his talent. I feel like I can't see Mason Graham slipping much further than this. Bit of a bigger guy, but look, certainly quality producer for Michigan. I feel like it makes sense to take him here. If they're not taking him, they've got to make their run blocking better. They've got to stimulate the run. They've got to make things easier for Tua and keep him protected. Problem is there's no Campbell or Banks here. Could they take Memboy? Maybe. Could they take Tyler Booker, who's a guard? Potentially. Any of those are options. But I've got Graham going here, which means those other guys will probably fall a little bit. And here's Tyler Warren, who I've talked about a few times. Colts could go a couple of ways. I've tossed up giving them a safety as well. It's really safety or tight end for them, which is a really weird combination of positions in the first round. In fact, a trade back's not out of the question as well. Tyler Booker, maybe you put him in their O-line and suddenly, gosh, they're going to open up some holes for Jonathan Taylor. What they really need to sort out is their play calling because Gus Bradley was awful last season. But yeah, I could see them shoring up the secondary, but I like them going tight end. Tyler Warren is a guy I really like. He's been fantastic to watch. He's a really fun pass catcher. Not the greatest blocker, but he's fine. And the Colts have been awful with their tight ends for so long. They need to sort that out. They can't keep cycling through 5 guys. It's just plain not working. So I see them going and finally getting a proper starter to put next to their solid wide receivers they've got at the moment. Now, I've been mocking the Falcons an edge rusher for 3 years now, and they keep not doing it, and they keep having no pass rush at all from the exterior. That's just not working. Shamar Stewart's the guy that's fallen in this case. Look, they would have loved a Micah Williams or a Jelon Walker as well. They would have been really good scheme fits. But I think Stewart makes sense here. Didn't have very good production at all, as I said, but gosh, his combine was impressive. He's a real athlete. I can see this being the fit here. Plus, Charlie Campbell's come out and said that Jahad Campbell is someone that they really like as well. In fact, I've heard that from Tony Pauline as well, who's another good guy you should go and look at too. He's had Campbell going here, or if he falls to the Bucks, that's an option, but I think edge makes the most sense. Could go a cornerback or a defensive tackle. They are two weaknesses, but you would expect this to be somewhere on the defense because they've been drafting offense for so long. They really need to sort the defense out now that they've finally got Michael Penix and a whole lot of offensive options around him. Now, this is a little bit early for Walter Nolan, in my opinion. I know he gets mocked in this range quite a lot. The problem is he's a real love-hate prospect. Could go anywhere between here to early to mid-day too. Depending on whether a team falls in love with him. Feels like a Cardinals thing to kind of do this sort of thing. Admittedly, they do a really good job of trading down and getting Paris Campbell a couple of years ago, but I don't know. It does feel like they would take this guy in this range here. They do need to sort out the defensive line in general. Edge rusher would make sense. There's no one that really fits in this range. They could reach for a James Pierce, for example. That'd be an option. Mike Green, I've seen mocked here, but I think this is too early for him as well. They're both very risky options with their character issues. So for that reason, I've got them going defensive tackle. But I do think O-line's an option as well. Membu maybe here, but potentially a Tyler Booker. Because they do need help on the interior more so than anything else. But I've given them the defensive tackle. I just think that's slightly more likely. And here's the safety I was talking about, Nick Emenwari. Look, he was fantastic. He looked spectacular at the combine as well. I think he's a real option here. They've been struggling, putting together a heap of plays into their secondary, and they just keep not hitting on them. They need to get it right at some stage. I don't see how they can miss with this pick. This feels like a perfect situation for them. Moved Dax Hill in as a corner. Bring in Emenwari. He is going to be fantastic. They had like 4 safeties on their roster last season, all of whom were viable starters, and they were all terrible. They just need to get a safety that's actually going to get the job done. So this is an opportunity for them to finally not bust. They've been spending a whole heap of money on guys like Joe Burrow, and they're going to need to on Jamar Chase as well. T. Higgins, they've somehow gone, put the tag on him as well, which makes no sense to me, which is why I don't have them taking a wide receiver here like I have previously. So they're going safety, and it is what it is. Also considered tight end as well. I think Colston Loveland would be an option, or Tyler Warren if he falls. But they have talked a lot about bringing Mike Gesicki back. Plus, I think if Eric All wasn't injured, he would be getting a lot more hype too. And here's Tyler Booker. I had him as high as 13 last mock. The issue, of course, is he plays on the interior of the O-line, and most teams prefer to do that on day 2. Seattle doesn't have too many really great needs outside the O-line. That is the main one. I could potentially see them going somewhere on defense as well, but there's no real obvious value here. I guess Jahad Campbell's not totally out of the question. They could go edge rusher, but I think O-line makes sense. Could be Booker, could be Membu, but Booker's more of an interior guy, a better player, despite his lack of upside and inability to play tackle. The one thing Seattle has is good tackles. It's the interior that sucks. So I think Booker makes most sense. And here's Campbell. I've talked about a few different times. He's an elite prospect, but he is an inside linebacker. They don't get drafted a lot in the first round. Having said that, we have certainly seen the Bucs do it. Have you heard of Devin White in the 5th overall pick? So you could imagine them going for Campbell. He was great for Bama. I do feel like this is a situation that makes sense. If it's not him, it's going to be someone in the front 7. Edge rusher would make sense as well because Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has been awful for a while after going in 2021 there. Someone like a Jalen Walker or a Shamar Stewart would be great, but hard to see them falling. Could they go for someone like a James Pierce here? I guess it's possible, despite the character concerns. So that's where I'm going with this pick. And this is a new one for me. I've been going safety previously here. I think Starks makes sense in this range, but I'm going tight end. There's a lot of talk about Colston Loveland. I do remember, I think it was Tony Pauline that came out and talked about Loveland being viewed by some teams as a top 12 prospect. He is a mismatched weapon. He's a solid blocker, but really is a very good receiver. I feel like him and Warren definitely deserve to be somewhere in this first round, and maybe even Elijah Arroyo as well. I know that Walt talks about him a lot. But I do feel like that Loveland could go here. A lot of people are mocking them a wide receiver. That makes no sense to me Firstly, there's not really a wide receiver that jumps out in this range, but also they got Troy Franklin, they got Marvin Mims, they got Vele, plus Cortland Sutton is nearly certainly coming back. I feel like they've got enough weapons for Bo Nix. It makes more sense for them to go tight end or running back if they're going to go offense in some way. And I feel like Loveland makes most sense in this range. Now, here's a team that needs to go wide receiver. We've typically seen in the past that Pittsburgh's done a pretty good job going wide receiver in the second and third rounds, but they kind of whiffed on Roman Wilson. Hard to tell if there was an injury thing or if they just weren't that enamored with him after they got their hands on him. So I've got them going wide receiver again. We've heard Art Rooney come out and just blatantly say, hey, we need to put a little bit of, I don't know if it's pressure on George Pickens or just give another option there. But there is a lot of talk they're going to be bringing Justin Fields back and giving him another crack as their starting quarterback, which is a little bit wild to me, but it's apparently what they're going to do. So in that case, they need to give him some options. So I think that Igbuka makes sense here. He's just a good, solid prospect. I feel like he is going to give them an option, even though he's not going to be anything special. I feel like he's going to be solid. Not impossible. I think that they could go Jackson Dart here, that it could be more of a smoke screen around Fields, and that Dart is considered a viable option. We have seen him rising at a pretty good combine, solid, like in all the earlier stuff. We've seen a lot of players struggling through the Senior Bowl and the combine as quarterbacks. On the other hand, Dart's actually been pretty solid. So he's kind of like the clear number 3 guy. He could sneak into the first round. But will they really do a Kenny Pickett again and make that same mistake? You got to think surely not this time. Also, if Ashton Genty somehow falls, I don't think he'll get this far, but if he somehow falls, he would be a great pick as well. And here is the Chargers, and I really struggle with them. A lot of people have them going a wide receiver 3. They don't need to. They just got Ladd McConkey. They're fine. Look, Joshua Palmer's a free agent. If he comes back or not, it doesn't really matter. They got Quinn Johnston on one end. They can find someone in free agency. There's always wide receiver 3s around. Tight ends mocked here quite often as well. I think Arroyo would be an option, or potentially Loveland falling to here, but they really do seem to like Will Dissly enough. So I could imagine that working as well. Running back, not impossible. There are actually some reports suggesting that some teams don't even think Ashton Genty's the number 2 running back. There's some that really like Hampton, like Amarian Hampton, which is crazy to me because I even slightly prefer Judkins a little bit more. But it's possible we'll see a running back. I just don't think it really makes sense for Harbaugh to do that when he wouldn't spend up on running back previously. Why is he suddenly going to do it now? He already got so much production out of J.K. Dobbins. If you can bring him back, he'll be fine. For that reason, I think they go defense. I think they probably go Thomas here as a cornerback or whichever top cornerback is available. Either that or a defensive tackle if they love someone. The issue is you can get a tackle in this range on day 2. So I feel like it makes more sense to go cornerback when there's going to be less of them around on day 2. Speaking of quarterbacks, it's really where the Packers need to go here. A lot of people mocking them Barron. I think that makes sense, but I've got Benjamin Morrison. A bit more of a risk because he is coming off an injury, but he's more of an upside play for me. So it's Morrison from Notre Dame going to the Pack. A lot of people mocking them a wide receiver as well. They've got like 5 wide receivers. They don't need a wide receiver. I know none of them are great, but they're fine. It's going to be okay. They're running the ball so much with Josh Jacobs now. They don't need an extra wide receiver. Their tight ends are doing fine. Their offense is fine. They just need to shore up that defense and make it a little bit better. And they can do that through the secondary with Morrison. And here's a new player in my mock drafts. He's been rising. Derek Harmon now looking more and more like a first-round option. He's someone I considered putting him in the past. I have been kind of convinced by looking at what a lot of other people are saying about him. Looked pretty good in the combine. Looks like a solid option. I had him as a day 2 pick. He's now day 1 for me. Got him going to the Vikings. So I previously had taking a cornerback. Problem is I had them taking Barron. And he's more of like a slot guy. They've got the slot kind of sorted. It's their outside linebackers they don't have. They're all free agents, and they were all awful. So I feel like they probably need someone a little bit better. I feel like they should be doing that through free agency. So we'll see what happens in free agency if they can get a cornerback. If not, then maybe I'll revert back to giving them a cornerback, depending on who's available. It's just, even in this mock, there's no one that's obviously good in this range at cornerback. Potentially could take Siobhan Ravel. Bit of a risky option given he's injured. That would be an option. Like I talked about Barron earlier. Trey Amos, not totally out of the question. I don't have him in my first round mocks anymore. But I've got them going for Harmon. He's just a good, solid, viable option. There's like a dozen defensive tackles they could take in this range. A trade back would actually make sense to pick up a little bit more capital, make up for what they did last year, where they went forward instead. Jordan Birch back at the Texans for me. I had him in my first mock draft here. I then changed it to a wide receiver, and they've now gone and gotten Christian Kirk for just a 7th round pick, which is pretty amazing. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is a free agent, unrestricted free agent, I should say, and Tank Dell obviously missing in 2025 with injury. They need to give Nico Collins someone around them, but they've got Kirk in. I feel like they don't need to spend another first on a wide receiver. They can probably do that later on. They could have gone Luther Burden here, but I feel like it makes more sense than them to go elsewhere. The other option, interior offensive lineman, not really anyone obvious. Membu maybe an issue, and maybe an option, I should say. Booker could fall to here, but I think it's probably pretty unlikely. So I've got them going defensive tackle. I guess they could have gone Donovan Jackson as well, potentially, or Josh Simmons. You'll see them pop up before the end of this mock. But there's so many interior defensive linemen. I feel like they can take their pick of the bunch. They're all kind of on that first, second round bubble. Birch is a real option of sliding in. I think Alfred Collins would be an option, but I think they need someone who can put a little bit more pressure on the quarterback. And Birch makes sense there. And here's Membu. Look, he is the favorite with the bookies to be the first defensive lineman off the board. I don't see it happening. Could he go in the top 10? Sure. He had a really good combine. He's looked impressive. It is entirely possible that he's gone way before this, but he hasn't at this stage. I feel like the Rams need to do a better job of protecting Matthew Stafford now that he's coming back. So tackle does make sense if the right guy is here. I can see Membu or potentially a Josh Simmons falling into this range. So I would like to see them get a starting left tackle there. I've mocked them a tight end in the past. There's not really one available with Warren and Loveland gone. Could they go Arroyo? Sure. But I feel like this might be a little bit early for him. Campbell, maybe if he falls, would be an option here. They could also go cornerback or wide receiver as well with Cooper Kupp obviously now pretty much out. That means that a wide receiver would be an option. Luther Burden was someone I considered. He'd be a solid replacement, but let's get that line sorted out for Stafford first. When you've got Puka Nacua, you don't really need a million other wide receivers around. And there's Josh Simmons. Previously, I've given the Ravens Ravel, but there's some value here. Simmons obviously recovering from an ACL injury, which is hurting his draft stock, but he deserves to be higher than this. He is a very good offensive lineman. I can imagine a situation where they go him here. Barron and Ravel were the other guys I considered. I think cornerback makes sense. They have struggled against the pass, but they also need to keep Lamar Jackson healthy and open up those lanes for him and Derrick Henry. That's got to be a priority. So I feel like Simmons would be a good pickup here. Ultimately with the Ravens, they're going to go for value. They're going to find value somewhere. They generally do a really good job of that. So I can imagine taking the risk on Simmons. On the other hand, a team that doesn't tend to take a risk, that goes for players that fit their scheme and their culture, I guess, is the Lions. There's some good edge rushers in this range. They could easily take someone like a James Pierce or a Mike Green, but they are not culture fits at all. Those guys have major character concerns, which have led to them falling. This is about the range for them, I think, but the Lions are never going to take those guys. Makes a lot more sense for them to stay on the edge, though. This is definitely somewhere they need to get better, opposite, obviously, from Aiden Hutchinson. So they can get both edges firing. Gosh, they're going to be effective. So here's Jack Sawyer, obviously someone who was very good in the playoff run for the Buckeyes. Physical, tough, perfect fit for that Detroit culture. Look, he's not the natural explosive player, but he's a leader. He's someone who's going to come in and fit their culture perfectly. I can imagine this happening. I'm not the only person. I know Walt has mocked this here as well. So shout out to him, who he definitely did at first. Also possible they go another cornerback, but they mocked a couple last year. So I can't imagine them going that way again. They got all the other positions kind of sorted, I feel, to an extent. Could go a big nose tackle. Maybe an Alfred Collins would make sense here as well. Interior offensive line may be an option if the right guy falls, but I love the Sawyer fit. And here's James Pierce finally going somewhere. Not out of the question for the Commanders to do this sort of thing and go an edge rusher who's a little bit risky. We've seen them take risks with players before. It hasn't always panned out. Hello, Chase Young, but it has at times. A lot of people are really impressed with what they've been doing recently. Bringing Deebo Samuel in was a good get. which is why I don't have a wide receiver going here anymore. I could easily have seen them going with a Luther Burden, who really should be in the first round somewhere. Even one of the other wide receivers that are available here. Obviously, you've got a few Texas guys like Bond would make sense in this range. Matthew Golden potentially, but I just don't see it. I don't see the fits. Especially now with Debo there. I feel like they have to improve the edge rush. It was awful last year. It all comes from the interior. Their edges can't do enough, especially if they can't get all of their interior guys back. They're going to need to improve their pass rush because they've got some pretty tough teams to beat in getting to the Super Bowl. So for that reason, James Pierce, explosive off the edge, great combine, major character concerns, could easily fall into this range or could go in the top 10. You just don't know with that sort of player. Alfred Collins, very different style of player, big-bodied, run stuffer on the interior, great for the Longhorns, comes in, helps out the Bills. I think this fit makes perfect sense. The Bills could not stop the run last season. They need to do something about that. A lot of people mocking them wide receivers. I feel like that whole weird rotation thing with Matt Collins coming in, that was just intentional. I feel like with the offseason, the Amari Cooper could still be fine. They need to get more out of Keon Coleman. They've still got Curtis Samuel there. And obviously they've got Khalil Shakir as well. So I think they're fine. I think they're fine on offense in general. I really don't think they need anything there. What wide receiver is possible, but I personally don't think it makes sense. I feel like it's got to be the defense somewhere. They've got to find a way of stopping the Chiefs and the other teams in that loaded AFC. So Collins makes sense to stop teams from just running through them. Speaking of the Chiefs, here go my Chiefs. Look, I always want to give them offensive linemen, and it so rarely happens. Certainly so rarely happens effectively. They need to protect Patrick Mahomes, and they're doing a great job of it because they just traded away Joe Thuney for a fourth rounder. Just pay the guy some money. There are other ways of getting under the cap. I don't understand that at all. They need to help the O-line. So they're helping it here in this mock with Donovan Jackson. More of an interior guy, maybe could slide out to tackle. They definitely need a tackle, but I'm hoping they do that during free agency. If they don't, then I'm more likely to mock them at tackle in the future. I could even see him trading up if Membu falls, for example. I think that makes sense. Simmons potentially would be another guy that could go in there. Potentially even get like someone like a Josh Connolly or something like that. There are a lot of guys around. Gray Zabel, for example, is someone who really impressed as well. So there are plenty of guys who are available who could be okay in this range. I've seen a mock guys like Emory Jones, for example. I think that would make sense too, but I don't know. I don't love it. I'm going with Jackson. I feel like he's probably the safer, better player. I could see them going for any other O-lineman. I could see them going for a defensive tackle. There's plenty in this range. Luther Burden would make sense, or one of those Texas guys, or even an edge rush. Gosh, we have a lot of needs. It's going to be another tough offseason. And finally, the Eagles. They can afford to take a risk on a guy who's got some major character issues, but he's explosive. Mike Green, I've seen him mocked in the top 10, but he's going to fall. That's not going to happen. Out of small school Marshall, I can see a situation where he makes it all the way to here and Eagles get a massive bargain. They need to replace Brandon Graham and also Josh Sweat's a free agent. So it makes sense to go and get a guy, take a risk on someone like a Green. There are plenty of other edge rushes they could take in this range as well. Potentially could get a guard just to help them out there. We have seen them have a few holes there. Cornerback an option somewhere in that secondary or back group there makes sense. And wide receiver's not out of the question. According to some people, I don't see it happening. I think they're more likely to go with the D-line here. And that's all we've got for Mock Draft 3.0. If you have any questions or any thoughts, please make sure you let me know. You can let me know in the comments below and ask your questions. I will get back to you as quickly as I can. Or if you want it done faster, hit me up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. You can also follow us on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can check out the full mock draft and all of my rankings for Dynasty as well over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. It'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. We'll be bringing these through a little bit more often as we get closer to the draft and talking about more fantasy stuff as well. Plus, you can check out my written outline of this mock coming in the coming week or so over at football.rasball.com. I'll be back in the next week or two, depending on how much power I have with this cyclone that's about to hit in the next 24 hours. It just got sunny, which is really random. But yeah, look out for us, pray for us. I'll see you guys on the next video.